Hey, thank you everybody for joining us today at our new location. Hopefully no one is on 1133 15th Street. So yeah, we'll be at this location for the next foreseeable future. Thank you for that. This is a user group that we started, I don't know, 2.5 years ago?
2.5 years ago.
So we're delighted that you showed up today and here to share stories and whatnot. So just as a form of introduction, my name is Karina Hami. I'm part of the Azure Government Engineering Team based in Washington, D.C. And Vishwas?
And I'm Vishwas Lele, CTO for Applied Information Sciences. Thank you all for coming.
You want to get that one?
Okay, sure.
This is a little low. Anyway, we started this organization because we really wanted everyone to come together and share the best practices, especially at the beginning of this whole cloud adoption momentum in government. And we've really enjoyed seeing so many different faces come every month. I always say in every meetup, please volunteer. We're always looking for volunteers to show us your demos and what you're creating. I had a great conversation before this meetup of what they're doing with bots, and I'm trying to get them to demo soon. They promised. So Vishwas, you'd like to talk about this as well?
I just want to reiterate that I was looking back at so many meetings we have had, and there have been many learnings from the speakers that we have. In fact, I have a short segment presentation. I was preparing the slides. I could see some things that I had learned right in this meetup. So that's a good feeling.
Great. And so if you have any feedback, please let us know. We're always trying to improve this. This is really a community-based, non-sales environment. So your feedback is really important to us. If you're on social media, it's #AzureGovMeetup. And then, like I said, it's going to be in Crystal City. So these are the future meetups. We're always on the platform. If you want to check out content, want to talk to us, want to see what other people are asking, go to the meetup site. With that, we're just around the corner from Ignite. This is a free event for 2,500 people. So everyone's welcome. It's at the Washington Convention Center. The Azure Government Engineering Team, I think everybody talking tonight will be there. There'll be plenty of sessions. So we're excited to host everyone. If it's free and open for all. So. No, I don't think so, actually. They'll come back to you shortly once you're waitlisted and just accept you. So I'm not quite, I know a lot of people have been waitlisted, but they will come back and accept you. So I wouldn't make other plans just yet. No. There's no aftermarket if you think that's happening. No. But if you really have any problems, I'm happy to help you out, so let me know.
For the right price?
No price.
Okay.
Just do more on Azure, how about that? Just kidding. So with that, Vishwas is actually going to do a segment tonight, so we're excited to see that. We really wanted to kick off January on how to get started and go through some demos on just the platform itself and how to get around. So Vishwas, you're going to start, right?
Yep.
And then we're going to have kind of a deep dive into Azure Migrate and Recovery. So there'll be a demo on that. And then how to get to compliant content migrations on AzureGov. So please ask as many questions as you want. We're going to have a good time. And don't forget to volunteer with your demos. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you, Karina. So I have a small segment here to, as Karina said, first session in 2019, and we thought it was fitting to start with getting started. And I have a few slides. Jeff, you're going to do the demo. I'm going to really try to give you, many of you are already working on AzureGov projects, but some of you have not been on an AzureGov project, or maybe worked on a project which was very focused on one service, perhaps. I'm just going to take a step back and sort of take you through a journey on some commonality that I've seen across many projects that I've worked on. Okay, so let's just get started. And you guys can hear me, so I don't need to double amplify my... Okay. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Jeff. So here is the agenda. And the agenda really is, if you look at the slide here, really takes you through what I'm going to be talking about. So the first part of the presentation is why AzureGov. We won't spend too much time on it. You are here. You know the reasons why AzureGov. We will quickly transition into getting started, and we will talk about things like eligibility, and many of you know what is the eligibility to get a subscription going. But then we'll quickly transition into, so once you have determined the eligibility, you have now obtained a subscription. The two most important things that you need to do once you've obtained a subscription is setting up the identity, right? You might have an identity from on-premises environment, maybe a cloud identity. We'll talk about that. I have some examples. So the very first thing you do is set up identity. So establish eligibility for getting a subscription, establish identity, and then the very next thing that you need to do, now that you have established a security and identity, you need to set up connectivity. Why connectivity? You may be connecting to a hybrid environment, maybe in some on-premises environment. We will talk about that in an example. And then once we have done connectivity and identity, now you have your subscription ready to go. The next thing we often do is determine what kind of application is this? What is the classification level? What compliance standards do we need? How can we achieve ATO? And the team has put out a lot of documents and assets for you to get the ATO process, the compliance process quickly. So we'll talk a little bit about the ATO, the blueprint process, which I worked on some of the blueprint templates. So once you've established the security and compliance, the next thing is the app migration. And I'll talk about the different approaches. And there's lately a lot of interest in, hey, I don't just want to migrate one or two applications. I want to migrate an entire portfolio of applications. Right? I see some head nods. That's a common challenge. And then once we have finished app migration, of course, nothing is complete. You still have to set up governance. And you also have to make sure that you're running your applications in the cloud in a cost-effective manner. So the total cost of ownership, how can you optimize your cost? How do you do automation? So if you look at this entire life cycle, if you think back, most of my projects, we have spent time in each of these phases. So, of course, I have only 30 minutes or less to go through that. I'm happy to take more questions afterwards. But let me just take you a journey of important points through each one of these phases. So why AzureGov? Like I said, I'm going to speed through this. Everybody, you've seen many presentations here on that. I would want to focus on just 4 things. This is a community cloud that is exclusive to government. There are other community clouds where you can have the government customers, but you can also bring commercial entities. This is exclusively for the government. The hybrid part is important. We're working on a project where it is hosted in AzureGov, but the identity is all hosted on-prem, so hybrid is extremely important. You need broad compliance level. Some applications may require impact level 2, 4, some may require 6, so you need the broadest level of compliance. And then, where cloud stands today, you're not just migrating your applications in an IaaS manner, you are also looking out for newer capabilities, whether it is IoT, AI, edge computing, and all of that. So you want all of that together, and that's what AzureGov offers you. Quickly moving through, so what are the kinds of solutions? I just wanted to give you a couple of examples. These days, government mission is not just to provide IT. Government mission is extending into, hey, I'm an agency, I want smart sensors, I want connected device perhaps, maybe smart cities, maybe military outposts. So I want solutions for these as well. Very important to keep in mind. Hybrid, as I mentioned, is important. Hybrid, it's very interesting, and Jeff did a presentation. I was thinking of you, Jeff. I was preparing for this. Hybrid is not just connecting to your on-premises system and obtaining an identity. Hybrid is also becoming taking your compute capability and deploying it everywhere that you need to deploy. And Jeff had shown us a demo a few months back about Databox, and what was really interesting for me about the demo was he was running compute workloads right on that Databox, and it could be placed anywhere. So hybrid definition is evolving as well. Beyond the data center integration, I mentioned the Databox Edge, AI-powered solutions, and then, of course, the new regions that we talked about that were announced, the secret regions. Okay, here's a quick picture of, let me see if I can zoom into this. Here's a quick picture. I circled all the data centers that are part of AzureGov. And then notice here at the bottom, there are also 2 secret regions which are not disclosed on this map as you would expect. Okay, let's just keep going. Here is an example, okay, of services. It's hard to see. Let me zoom into this a little bit. You can see here, this is the reason I did not try to create this into a slide. This is a picture from the website itself. This changes quite often. If you wanted to look at which service is available where, it gives you a nice picture. And as I said earlier, it is not just about IaaS, it's not just about VMs and network and storage, it is also about all of the innovative PaaS capabilities. So all of the services listed here are available. And for example, Logic Apps, Event Hubs, Dev Test Labs, and that's an important service that many customers are using today. I want to set up a lab environment where my employees, my developer teams can innovate. Okay, so that's the PaaS services. All right, so let me shift gears. This was really about why AzureGov, what kind of capabilities that it offers. Let's now talk about getting started, all right? And with getting started, I want to talk about 3 things: eligibility, connectivity, and identity, as I said earlier. So eligibility, once again, keep in mind, and the first rule of being a presenter is to turn your phone off, and I failed to do that. There will be other things that a presenter should do. I was reading this article that 5 things that a good presenter should not do. And I've been consistently doing all of those 5 things in my speaking career. Okay, so you're subjected to me as a speaker with those 5 things not happening, although the first thing happened. Sorry, I should actually turn it off. I just, okay, all right. Toss it, yeah. Okay, eligibility. This is not a new slide for you guys. I mentioned earlier, this is the only community government cloud that is exclusive to government agencies, which means commercial entities are not allowed. So you can have a US government entity, you can have a partner that is providing a solution for a government entity, or you can have a commercial entity at the bottom of the screen that is dealing with a data set that is subject to some sort of a regulation. So if you meet these requirements, you can get a subscription. I was just helping a friend. He runs a small ISV, a tooling company, and he wanted to make sure his product works with AzureGov, and we went through how he could make his product available in AzureGov. Once you've established the eligibility and you have signed up for a subscription, then the very first thing that you need to do next is the identity. Because you want to know who this user is, how do you want to control permissions, who has access to the assets, who can provision, who can delete, who can monitor. And identity is not an easy story. Maybe you want to project the identity that you have on premises, and I'm working with a customer where they have an ADFS server on premises, and then we are projecting the identity onto the cloud. It could be just cloud-based identity, or it could be some sort of a hybrid example of that. Now, keep in mind that which solution that you choose is really dependent on what kind of app you're building. If it's a modern app, you can get away with OAuth or OpenID. But if you're dealing with a legacy app that requires Kerberos or NTLM, then you might be dealing with some sort of hybrid identity. Okay, here is an example of, I took the most complex example of identity and just to show you here. In this case, what is happening, in this case, let's zoom into this. You can see this is an example of a hybrid identity. We have the Azure Government AAD setup, so Azure AD Government, which is then connected to an on-premises identity. Okay, so that's one example. Let me show you another example very quickly. The other example is, now that I've projected my identity to the cloud, maybe you're building a web application and you want to
authenticate your users against that web application. And this is an example. You can create any web application. Maybe it's a web app. You can get identity from the Azure AD Gov tenant that you have. Keep in mind there are some differences. For example, Azure AD Gov may not give you B2B, or you can't join your devices to Azure AD Gov. A couple of differences to keep in mind. So now that we have established the subscriptions, we have established the identity, the next thing we have to do is set up connectivity. And this is where things like CAP or Cloud Access Point come into picture. So there's something called the DISA CAP, which some of you may be familiar with. Think of that as the conduit between the Department of Defense and the commercial cloud. It demarcates the boundary between the two. And I posted a link. We'll post these slides, of course. If you're interested, go check out this PDF, which has a lot of details about setting up a cloud access point. In fact, let me show you a picture of how this works. These are all, let me just zoom into this so you can see it better. These are all Azure Gov Express points, the CAP points, which you can connect to, right? Okay, let's keep going. So let me now show you a connectivity example. And I chose this example from the Azure Gov documentation. And here's the interesting part. So in this case, what's happening is, if you click on this button here, go to the website, click on this button, this actually deploys an application in your Azure tenant, which will be deploying an Azure service environment, which uses the cloud CAP to talk to an on-premises environment. So if you wanted to try this out, here's an example available. Everybody makes sense? Am I going too fast? It makes, okay, all right. So we just completed how to begin, which is set up the subscription, setting up the identity, and we show a couple of examples of setting up identity, and then we talked about setting up connectivity, which is important. All right. So now that we have our stuff working and secure, next thing comes is security and compliance, because just saying that it is secure is not enough, of course. You have to obtain all the right compliance levels. Before we look at the ATO process itself, let's just take a look at what Azure Gov offers us out of the box. So these are all the global compliance from Azure, and if focusing on Azure Gov specifically, so these are all the compliance things that are available to you as part of the Azure Gov. All right. In addition to these compliance levels, let's also quickly take a look at the different data, the spectrum of data that you can host in different Azure Gov locations. So you can see from the left to right, you have different impact levels. What kind of data can you host, from a state local to the far left to the national security system impact level 6. So you have a wide spectrum of data that can be hosted in different environments. Okay, so now that you know the compliance levels, how can you achieve this compliance? And this is where tools like, so the Azure Gov team has put out, and we worked on one of the tools with them called the Blueprints projects. And if you're getting started, or if you're on a project where going through this process, it's really important to take a look at the guidance that has been put out. So the guidance include ARM templates, and I'll show you an example, which is all of the security controls are baked in. So if you go and deploy one of those configurations, out of the box you get access to these security controls. In addition, you have something called the customer responsibility matrix. So these are Excel documents where all of the Azure provided controls are pre-populated, and you just have to complete the cells that is the customer responsibility. And I'll show you a chart just now how efficient this makes the whole process. And the third thing is all of the security documentation SSPs. So here is an example of the blueprint that we worked on. And funnily enough, that blueprint conversation started here at that meetup. Maybe 18 months ago, there was a security discussion, and right after this discussion, we said, wouldn't it be nice if we started to automate this and made it available on GitHub? And all of these templates are available on GitHub. Here's an example of the responsibility matrix that I was talking about. And just to give you an idea of how it has made things simpler, let me bring up this slide right here. So you can see if I zoom into this, you can see that the total coverage is, of course, the whole span, and the blue box, the 10% of this is really the client responsibility. So 90% of that matrix is filled out for you as provider supported controls, right? Okay, so one other slide here. Let me just zoom back and let's just go to the next slide. And this gives you how much time savings you can have. So historically, far left, we had to do all these things by hand. And if you've not worked on a project like that, you know how complex that was. And then with the blueprint and the matrix, you can certainly accelerate the achieving of these compliance standards. And this is an example of the blueprint that I was talking about. I worked on a couple of blueprints here. And so specifically this one, I worked on this one. When I say I was part of a team that worked on this. And you can see the topology here. All of this entire topology is automatically created for you, along with the right tagging and all the security controls. So I highly recommend you check this out. The last thing I want to talk about is that was number 2, by the way. All right, so security documents, and then, of course, you have to worry about the STIG controls, and many of those automation scripts are already available. How am I doing in terms of time, Tina? Time is okay? How much? About 12 minutes or so more?
Can I ask a quick question? STIG controls are for Server 2016,
Yeah.
and all that stuff.
Yeah.
What about some of the services manager? Do you ever envision some of the service manager getting STIG controls, or this come down saying this needs to figure
The
or something like that?
the PaaS services themselves, you mean?
I'm just curious if you see that happen.
So let me repeat the question. The question is, it's great to see all these controls, and especially the IaaS-based blueprints. And tell.
But as you move up the stack,
Yeah.
away from servers and
Right.
things like that,
Right.
is
Right.
STIG's going to follow that?
That's a good question, and tell me if I parsed it correctly. Your question, which is great to see these controls for IaaS, but as we move up the level of abstraction, can we still get these controls? Because as you know, as you move up in abstraction, you get you are abstracted some of the details, but you lose some control here as well. What is very interesting is if you look at things like AKS, where it's really a combination of a PaaS service and the control. And with services like AKS, you can deploy things like daemon sets, which can get you that additional level of control. So I'm happy to talk some more about that. That's an exciting development there, where you're moving up the stack, but you also have more control there. We'll talk some more there. All right, keep going. I asked her the question 10 minutes back, so I have 9 minutes left. I have 20 minutes left? Okay, so okay, good. So you mean Azure SQL database?
Right. Yes.
So Azure SQL database. First of all, I'm really glad to see I have 20 minutes left, so I can breathe easily. Okay, Azure SQL database. Already you start seeing some interesting things happening in the Azure SQL database. Azure SQL database is a multi-tenant service with a public endpoint up until now. That was a problem for some people. They have recently added something called the virtual service endpoints. If you're not, you probably know that capability. That what you can do is you can say only people inside this VNet can access this endpoint, right? So I see even PaaS services getting that additional level of control, and this is one example of that. Okay. So
SQL Server database, PaaS server, is already FedRAMP certified.
it is a certified service, but their question was,
This is STIG coming out and saying you must
he's talking about the stick.
you must have
It is already certified, but he's talking about the stick controls, right? So the reason I was happy that I have 20 minutes left, because what I find is if I start talking fast, and I usually do when I'm passionate about some topic, then I tend to lose people. But usually my experience has been that if you hear me talking for about 5 to 7 minutes, then I don't need to roll my R's, and these things just flow more easily. I'm joking, guys. Come on, laugh a little bit.
So I have another question. When I'm standing up an environment, and I've done this in several different clouds, private clouds and other clouds, when you start with a server, that server can be a plain vanilla server, or it can be a stigged server. Mm-hmm. So in Azure, do you offer a stigged server that can be stood up, that can be purchased, and then applications can be applied on top of that?
Do you guys try to answer this?
Because that helps with the ATO.
Yes.
All right, so a couple things. So we do have something called the CIS images, the hardened images, and that's something that you can do there. Also, within our services branch, as in terms of Premier, we have GPOs that we do recommend to our staff and members on what to put into the STIGs. There are some STIG settings that actually will break the actual functionality of the server, as like on-prem, but my point is that we would say that when you go with those STIGs, use that with caution. Our recommendation is take something from the gallery, if possible, and overlay it with GPOs. That way, that will be the easiest and safest way to move forward into the cloud. And there's also the ability of using CIS hardened images.
So you can purchase and use CIS images?
Yes, you can.
Okay, thank you.
You can use one of those images, as you were saying, right? Yeah, yeah. By the way, we have some real experts sitting here in the front row. Can you raise your hand so you can also, please. Yes, not fake experts like me, but real experts here. Okay, all right. Let's just keep going. Azure Security Center for AzureGov is in preview. All right. Now let's just talk about. So shifting gears here, I don't want to lose anybody here. We have established the eligibility, we have established the connectivity, we have established the identity, and then we have looked at the compliance levels, we have picked the services that have the right compliance levels, and then we have worried about state, the generation of the documents and things like that. Okay. Then comes, okay, now let's just do an application portfolio assessment and see what workloads should be moved to the cloud and what is the most expedient route to move these applications to the cloud. Okay. So first and foremost, rehost. You probably also known as lift and shift. You are taking your existing applications and you are moving these applications en masse, lifting and shifting these up to the cloud. We don't have time for big debates around, is this good, is this bad? Well, this is a good approach. If you want to move these applications as is quickly, of course there are downsides, but speed is important. Other reason you may want to use this is really a no-code option, no-code change option. You can essentially take your applications, assuming your underlying OS is supported in Azure, then you can essentially move these applications to the cloud. I would like to point to I wrote a blog a few months back, and I was talking to Karina about this. We are also getting a lot of requests from customers who are saying we want to move large number of applications, but we don't want to continue to patch these machines ourselves. We don't want to be in the business of patching and applying hot updates and things like that. What can we do in that case? But at the same time, we don't want to touch the code base. And an approach that I've been talking about, in fact, if you come to Ignite, I have a talk about this session, we'll go much deeper into this, is take that existing application and then containerize it. And I'm not talking about microservices style containerization. I'm talking about coarse-grained containerization of these applications, either Windows container or Linux container, and without a code change and moving your application. And I like to call that modernized by shifting approach because you're getting some benefits there. Right? The next approach, of course, is refactor. You can take your existing application, take a look at the code. You want to just refactor certain pieces. Maybe your database is running in SQL Server, and you want to move to Azure SQL database managed instances, perhaps. You have some website running in an on-prem IaaS setting, perhaps. You want to move into app service. Some sort of refactoring is required. And then last but not the least is you are completely reimagining your application, and you want to go with a serverless route or or something of that nature, where you're going to a completely event-driven architecture, reimagine the application. Of course, the benefits are many. You can operate at a much more cost-efficient manner, and the applications can scale. It's not your responsibility to scale. Essentially, the team that is supporting Azure Functions, for example, will scale based on your incoming load. So we of course glossed over the 4 approaches. We can spend and talk on each approach if you had to. But essentially, think about these as your 4 major approaches to thinking about moving your workloads to the cloud. And oftentimes, you want to move 1 or 2 applications, see how that works out, learn from it, and then apply it to the remaining portion of your application portfolio. All right, with that, I come to my last segment. So now you have moved your applications, you've achieved some ATO, you've gotten compliance, but your job is not done. We still are responsible for all of the governance pieces, all of the DevOps pieces, and let's talk a little bit about that. This is a talk I did at Ignite last year about secure DevOps, and let me just zoom into this and let's just talk about this for a moment. So Azure has this concept, and we had a talk on Azure policies in one of the meetings here. If you're not familiar with Azure policies is, as an administrator, you get to set up policies and say, hey, if you're deploying a database, you only get to deploy in AzureGov region A and B, and you're not allowed to deploy anything outside of that. So I can set up a policy like that. So you can deploy your configuration at the time of provisioning. You can enforce all the policies, but these policies also give you a runtime application of these policies are also possible. And then you also have the blueprint we talked about. Take those blueprints and deploy it. And usually what we have done with the blueprints is, once you've deployed the blueprints, we've also had extension of those blueprints where we go and validate. So let's say you've put all these controls in place in your script. We have a validation script which goes and checks, okay, so you satisfied this security control requirement by having this OMS agent, and let's write a validation script to make sure that OMS agent is working correctly. So that's an important part. And what we are really striving here is continuous compliance. I think that's the way to put it. It's not just compliance when you're provisioning this application, but you're complying with all of the standards through the life of that application. So if something changes, you're notified, and so on and so forth. So deployment, validation, and then this is a proof of concept we did. We have really not used it in production, but what we did was we essentially tagged all of the ARM templates with some interesting metadata, and then we automatically generated some security control documentation based on that. And the last part is monitor. So there is something called Azure Monitor, which you may be familiar with, a very interesting capability. If somebody goes in and changes, let's say one of your security control is disk encryption, and somebody goes and turns the encryption off or changes something, you get notified, and you know that there is some change in the underlying compliance regime, and you can go take an action. So this is sort of the full scope of the secure DevOps life cycle. Okay, and this is a quick picture of Azure Monitor. My last 2 slides, I promise. So total cost of ownership and cost optimization. So what is happening, as I talk to many decision makers, what's happening is people moved into the cloud, and now that they've been in the cloud, they're saying, okay, why is this costing me this much? I expected this to cost less. Well, what really needs to happen is, as you get more mature in your usage of the cloud, your cost should go down. So you need to think about things that are listed here on the slide here. Am I using the right SKU? In my attempt to go in and I was worried of the performance, I got the biggest and best machines available. Do I really need it? Does my usage data require that? So I need to do that. I need to do some usage-based optimization. I work with a commercial customer. We are enabling auto-scaling at a very high level. We went in, they were very concerned that I don't want to scale down. I don't know, what if I get a spike in my workload? Well, now we have trends, and now we can apply auto-scaling. And then last but not the least is pricing based. In the last meeting, we talked about how reserved pricing is now available in AzureGov. So if you have a workload that is going to be on continuously for a period of time, absolutely go in and get reserved pricing. So think about these things. And absolutely the last slide is something called the Azure Service Catalog that the company that I've worked for built. And the reason, this is not, I'm not trying to market this. This is an open source tool, so you can go into GitHub and get access to this code yourself. We also put it in the Azure Marketplace. So we think that, to have an adequate governance approach in place, you need some sort of a service catalog where your teams can go in and in a self-service manner provision things, and you can sort of monitor them and apply policies to them. And what we did was we essentially developed a tool, put it in the Azure Marketplace, and also put it on GitHub. And if you're interested, happy to talk more about this. So with that, this is a whirlwind. So completing the picture here, identity, connectivity, security, migration of your applications, and then governance and total cost of ownership. Okay. So with this, those are my slides. Based on, I have about 4 or 5 minutes for questions, if there are any. Yes, ma'am.
Sure. Back in the slide about automating compliance. So that is, I think, of interest to lots of folks, bringing the total workload associated with continuous ATOs and reauthorizations down. Can you talk about work y'all are doing? You mentioned you don't have anything in production yet, where you're going and where you see that going, and just generally, how can we do automated compliance going forward?
So when I said what we didn't have in production, I was talking specifically about automatically generating a document. And there are some third-party tools available that you can do that. But the continuous monitoring part, we do have that in production. And what we have done essentially is all our automation scripts, all of the ARM templates, we have alongside provisioning these resources, we also provision the policies in place. So if something changes, we get notified. In addition, we set up subscriptions for Azure Monitor. And then you can set up things like Azure Monitor alerts. So there are a whole host of things. I'm happy to talk to you more about that or send you examples from GitHub of things that we have done.
You guys had a presentation, and we're actually going to pilot GovReady about a couple things ago. So GovReady has compliance as a code. You should check that out. So all the things, not just the technical controls, but the non-technical controls, we're going to start piloting hopefully soon after the shutdown ends.
Yeah. Tina, I think wants to add to
So one more thing for the blueprint part right there, we're actually, to what we're talking about is basically a framework of actually putting scripts together, but we're also taking the focus of industry, healthcare, government, the typical type of controls that you see, actually putting those controls to actually run against not only policy, but enforcing against your actual environment. Also, in addition, we mentioned also there are the templates. There's a website you can go to, download those, like 400 controls in a spreadsheet, pipe that into the tool of your choice, and then you can use that with your ISO. So now you can have policy enforcement, but now you have the compliance as well with an automated fashion.
And as I mentioned, Azure Monitor, is available for some services. For the services it's available, for example, storage. It's a great way to get a push notification if something changes and you need to know about that. And they are expanding it to other services as well. Any other questions? Well, in that case, I'm going to give back the time to the next speaker. Thank you. And let's just bring up, is that you, Jeff? All of you? Thank you.